What would you do if a billionaire, after a lavish $700 meal, looked you straight in the eye and left a $1 tip for 24-year-old waitress Ilara Vance? This wasn't just an insult. It was a devastating blow that pushed her to the brink of despair. With her mother's life hanging in the balance and eviction notices piling up, that single dollar felt like the world's cruelest joke. But what she did next in her moment of quiet desperation set in motion a chain of events so unbelievable it would shatter her world and rebuild it from the ground up. This isn't a story about a tip. It's about a test, and the results would change everything forever. The scent of truffle oil and seared scallops hung heavy in the air at Aurelia, a restaurant where the cutlery cost more than Ilara Vance's weekly groceries. Every night was a performance. Ilara wasn't just a waitress. She was a curator of experiences for people who lived in a different reality. She perfected a smile that didn't show the exhaustion gnawing at her bones, a calm demeanor that betrayed none of the panic screaming in her mind. Her reality was a cramped second-floor apartment where the scent of antiseptic clung to the faded floral wallpaper. Her mother, Sarah, lay in a rented hospital bed that dominated the tiny living room. 5 months ago, there was a diagnosis: atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome, ACUS, a rare, life-threatening genetic disease that caused blood clots to form in small blood vessels. The doctors at County General had done what they could, but the only drug that could truly manage it, a monoclonal antibody called Soliris, was famously one of the most expensive drugs in the world. Insurance called it experimental for her specific case and refused to cover it. The cost was over $500,000 a year. So Ilara worked. She worked doubles at Aurelia, picked up extra shifts bussing tables at a greasy spoon diner for breakfast, and filled any remaining hours with freelance data entry, her eyes burning from the screen's glare late into the night. Every dollar, every coin went into 3 piles: rent, basic utilities, and the laughably small Sarah's Fund. The fund currently held $742. It was a single drop of water against a raging inferno. Tonight was a Tuesday, usually a slower evening. Ilara hoped for a few generous tables, a small windfall to cover the overdue electricity bill. Her section was quiet until he walked in. He moved with an unnerving stillness, a man who didn't need to command a room because the room simply rearranged itself around him. He was alone, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. His silver hair was impeccably styled, and his eyes, a piercing shade of grey, seemed to miss nothing. He asked for a table in her section, the quiet corner booth with a view of the city lights. "Good evening, sir. My name is Ilara, and I'll be taking care of you tonight," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. He didn't smile, just gave a curt nod. "A bottle of the 2005 Chateau Margaux to start." Ilara's eyes widened slightly. That was a $400 bottle of wine. "Excellent choice, sir," she managed to say, her heart beginning to pound. A table like this could change her week, maybe even her month. His name, she learned when he handed her a credit card to hold at the bar, was Alistair Blackwood. The name sounded vaguely familiar, like someone she might have read about in a business magazine she couldn't afford. For the next 2 hours, he was the perfect, yet most unnerving customer she had ever served. He ordered the Wagyu steak, the lobster bisque, and a decadent dessert. He spoke little, but he watched everything. He watched how she refilled his water glass before it was empty. He watched how she patiently explained a dish to the elderly couple at the next table. He watched how she discreetly picked up a fork another waiter had dropped without drawing attention to it. Ilara felt like she was under a microscope. Yet she performed her duties flawlessly, driven by the mounting total of his bill. With the wine appetizers, main course, and dessert, the final check came to $714.50, Standard gratuity of 20% would be over $140. $140. That was the electricity bill and a week's worth of groceries. A wave of desperate hope washed over her. She placed the leather-bound bill folder on his table. "Thank you very much for dining with us tonight, Mr. Blackwood. I hope you enjoyed everything." He looked up from his phone, his grey eyes meeting hers. For a moment, she saw something flicker in them. Something that wasn't cold, but she couldn't place it. "Everything was satisfactory, thank you, Ilara." He placed his card in the folder and slid it back to her. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked to the POS station. The transaction went through. Her heart hammered in her chest as she walked back to his table with the receipt to sign. He took a pen from his jacket, a heavy silver instrument, and scribbled his signature. He folded the customer copy of the receipt, placed it next to the bill folder, and then stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. "Good night," he said, and with that, he was gone, leaving a wake of silence. Ilara waited a respectful 30 seconds before approaching the table. The hope was so intense, it was a physical ache in her chest. She opened the leather folder. Inside was the signed merchant copy of the receipt. On the tip line, he had drawn a firm, deliberate line. There was nothing there. Her blood ran cold. No, please, no. Maybe he left cash. Her eyes darted across the table, and then she saw it. Lying precisely in the center of the table where his plate had been was a single crisp $1 bill. The world seemed to slow down. The ambient clatter of the restaurant, the murmur of conversations, the distant sizzle from the kitchen, it all faded into a dull roar in Ilara's ears. She stared at the $1 bill. George Washington's portrait seemed to mock her, his familiar face twisted into a smirk. $750 and $1. It wasn't just a bad tip, it was a statement, a deliberate, calculated insult. It was a gesture that said, "You are worth nothing. Your service, your smile, your time, it all amounts to this single, pathetic piece of paper." Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at her eyes. She felt the gazes of the other staff, even if they weren't looking. News of a stiff bill on a huge check traveled fast in the restaurant world. Her colleague, Chloe, a waitress with a perpetually sour expression and an eagle eye for others' misfortunes, was already gliding over. "Big spender cash out?" Chloe asked, her voice laced with faux sweetness. "Heard he had the Margot. You must have made a killing." Ilara couldn't speak. She just pointed a trembling finger at the dollar on the table. Chloe leaned in her eyes, widening first in disbelief, then in malicious glee. "No way," she whispered, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Blackwood stiffed you. Oh, honey, what did you do to tick him off?" "Nothing." Ilara whispered the word, feeling like ash in her mouth. "I did nothing." "Must have been something," Chloe said, snatching the dollar bill from the table. She held it up between two fingers as if it were contaminated. "Well, don't spend it all in one place." She laughed a short, ugly sound and walked away, already beginning to broadcast Ilara's shame to the kitchen staff. A storm of emotions raged inside Ilara. First came the searing anger. She wanted to run out of the restaurant, find Alistair Blackwood, and throw the dollar in his face. She wanted to scream at him, to ask him what kind of soulless monster enjoys a $700 meal and then spit in the face of the person who served him. But the anger was quickly extinguished by a wave of crushing despair. The $140 she had been counting on vanished a phantom figure that had existed only in her desperate imagination. The electricity bill would remain unpaid. The small deposit into her mother's fund wouldn't happen. Tonight, she had not taken a step forward. She had taken a giant leap back. The 2 hours she spent serving that man, 2 hours she could have been at her other job, were now worth exactly $1. Tears threatened, but she choked them back. Crying on the restaurant floor was a luxury she couldn't afford. With a deep, shuddering breath, she cleared the rest of the table. Her movements were robotic. She stacked the expensive plates, gathered the silver cutlery, and picked up the half-empty wine glass. As she reached for the dollar bill Chloe had carelessly tossed back onto the table, her first instinct was to crumple it, to tear it into 100 tiny pieces and let it fall like worthless confetti. But then something stopped her. Maybe it was the sheer exhaustion. Maybe it was a flicker of the pragmatism that had kept her afloat for so long. $1 was still $1. It could buy a carton of milk. It could pay for 30 minutes of parking at the hospital. It wasn't a nothing, not when you had next to nothing. Or maybe it was something else. A strange, stubborn refusal to let him win. Crumpling the bill would be an act of passion, an emotional response. He wasn't worth her emotion. Treating this dollar like any other dollar, like the insignificant piece of paper, it was felt like the only power she had left. She picked it up. It was strangely crisp, as if it had just come from the mint. She didn't look at it. She just smoothed it out and slid it into the pocket of her apron, alongside the few other crumpled bills she'd made from her other less promising tables. It felt both heavy and weightless, a paradox of currency and contempt. She finished her shift in a daze, the forced smile plastered on her face, feeling like a cheap mask. When she finally clocked out and stepped into the cool night air, the facade crumbled. She leaned against the brick wall of the alley behind the restaurant and let the tears come silent, tears of frustration, exhaustion, and utter soul-crushing defeat. The single dollar in her pocket felt like a stone, weighing her down, a symbol of a world that was designed to break people like her. The next few days were a blur of muted desperation. The $1 bill sat on the chipped formica countertop of her kitchen, a constant, silent accusation. Every time she saw it, the humiliation of that night washed over her again. It became a focal point for all her anxieties. The red-inked eviction notice tucked into her apartment door, the increasingly worried calls from her mother's home care nurse about needing to pay for the next shipment of medical supplies, the way her own stomach rumbled because she'd been skipping meals to save money. At work, Chloe made sure no one forgot. "Hey, Alara, don't stand too close to the register. You might get a paper cut from all your big tips," she'd call out across the floor. Alara just kept her head down, her smile tighter, her movements more efficient. She couldn't afford to get fired. On Friday, 3 days after the incident with Alistair Blackwood, her world tilted on its axis. She was in the middle of a hectic lunch rush, balancing a tray of entrees, when her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Marcus, called her over. "Alara, there's someone here to see you," he said, his brow furrowed. "He's not a customer. Says it's important." Her first thought was that it was a debt collector. Her stomach plummeted. She wiped her sweaty palms on her apron and walked towards the front of the restaurant. Waiting by the host stand was a man who looked distinctly out of place. He wore a dark conservative suit, carried a slim leather briefcase, and had the patient, impassive air of a lawyer or a corporate functionary. "Miss Alara Vance?" he asked. His voice was calm and professional. "Yes," she said, her own voice, barely a whisper. "My name is Arthur Harrison. I am an associate with Blackwood Capital. May I have a moment of your time?" The name hit her like a physical blow. Blackwood. Her mind reeled. Was this a sick joke? Was Alistair Blackwood so monstrous that he sent an associate to complain about her service to get her fired? "I'm in the middle of my shift," she stammered. "This will only take a moment." Mr. Harrison insisted, his gaze unwavering. Marcus, sensing the gravity of the situation, nodded for her to go ahead. They stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun. Mr. Harrison opened his briefcase and retrieved a thick cream-colored envelope. He held it out to her. "This is for you from Mr. Alistair Blackwood." Elara stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "I don't understand. If he had a complaint, he could have spoken to my manager." "There is no complaint, Miss Vance," Harrison said smoothly. "Quite the opposite. This is an invitation. Mr. Blackwood requests a meeting with you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. The address is inside. A car will be sent to your residence at 9:15 to escort you." Elara was speechless. An invitation, a car. What was happening? She took the envelope, her fingers numb. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. "Why would he want to meet with me?" "Mr. Blackwood prefers to discuss his intentions directly," Harrison replied, offering no further explanation. "All I am authorized to say is that this pertains to a professional opportunity. And as a gesture of goodwill for your time, Mr. Blackwood has included this." He handed her a second, smaller envelope. Inside, Elara could see the crisp edges of $100 bills, a lot of them. "That is $5,000, Harrison said, as if commenting on the weather, "to compensate you for any wages lost and to handle any immediate personal concerns. Your acceptance of this money does not obligate you in any way." With a polite nod, he turned and walked away, leaving Elara standing on the sidewalk, the city noise buzzing around her, holding an invitation that made no sense, and more money than she had seen in one place in years. She stumbled back into the restaurant, her mind a whirlwind of confusion, suspicion, and a tiny, terrifying spark of hope. She hid the money in her locker, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the combination lock. For the rest of her shift, she moved as if in a dream, her thoughts miles away. That evening, after checking on her mother, she sat at her kitchen table and finally opened the formal invitation. The cardstock was heavy, the text embossed. It was an address on the top floor of the Blackwood Tower, downtown, a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a symbol of wealth and power so immense it seemed to belong to another planet. She looked at the $1 bill still sitting on her counter. Then she looked at the $5,000 in cash fanned out beside it. Nothing made sense. Was this a game, a cruel, elaborate prank played by a bored billionaire, or was it something else entirely? Fear warred with desperation. The $5,000 could pay the rent for months. It could buy a significant amount of her mother's medication. It was a lifeline. But it came from the man who had humiliated her. Walking into that tower felt like walking into the lion's den. But what choice did she have? The eviction notice was still on her door, and her mother's tired eyes held a fear that Elara couldn't bear to see. With a deep breath that did little to calm her racing heart, she made a decision. She would go. She would walk into the lion's den and find out what the king of the jungle wanted with a waitress he deemed worthy of only a single dollar. The next morning, Elara woke before her alarm, a knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. She dressed in the nicest outfit she owned, a simple black dress, slightly faded but clean, and a pair of worn-out flats. She felt like a child playing dress-up, preparing to meet royalty. At precisely 9:15 a.m., a sleek black sedan, the kind she'd only ever seen in movies, purred to a stop in front of her run-down apartment building. The driver, a man in a crisp suit and sunglasses, got out and opened the rear door for her without a word. The interior smelled of clean leather and quiet wealth. As the car pulled away from her neighborhood of cracked pavement and graffiti-lined walls, Elara felt like she was crossing an invisible border into another country. The Blackwood Tower was an imposing spear of glass and steel. In the lobby, waterfalls cascaded down marble walls, and people in expensive suits moved with an air of effortless importance. Arthur Harrison was waiting for her. "Miss Vance, glad you could make it," he said with a small professional smile. "Right this way." He led her to a private elevator. There were no buttons inside, only a discreet keycard slot. Harrison inserted a card, and the elevator began its silent, impossibly fast ascent. Her ears popped. The ride felt like an eternity, each floor a step further away from the life she knew. The elevator doors opened directly into a sprawling office. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city. The world she struggled in every day was laid out below like a map. A massive mahogany desk stood at the center of the room, but the man she was there to see was not behind it. Alistair Blackwood stood by the window, his back to her, looking down at the city. He was dressed not in a suit, but in a simple cashmere sweater and trousers. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a philosopher. "Thank you, Arthur. That will be all," he said, his voice calm and resonant. Harrison gave a slight bow, and the elevator doors closed, leaving Elara alone with him. He turned to face her. His grey eyes were not cold, as she remembered, but held a deep, penetrating intelligence, and something else, a profound weariness. "Miss Vance, Elara, please have a seat," he said, gesturing to 2 comfortable-looking armchairs near the window. She sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't understand why I'm here. If it's about the other night, my service—" He held up a hand, silencing her. "Your service," he said, "was impeccable. It was in fact flawless." Elara stared at him, utterly bewildered. "Then, the tip $1. He met her gaze directly. "The $1 was not a tip, Miss Vance. It was the final question in a very long and thorough examination, an examination which you passed." She just shook her head, the confusion mounting. "An examination? I'm a waitress. I don't know what you're talking about." Blackwood walked over and sat in the chair opposite her. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Let me be direct. For the past 6 months, my team and I have been engaged in a very specific search. We were not looking for a CEO or a financial analyst. We were looking for a person with a rare combination of qualities: integrity, empathy, grace under pressure, and kindness when no one is watching. We were looking for someone of exceptional character." He paused, letting the words sink in. "My team vetted hundreds of potential candidates across the city from all walks of life. We used private investigators' background checks and quiet observation. Your name came to our attention through a recommendation from a nurse at County General who was impressed by the devotion you showed to your mother. So we began to watch you." Elara felt a chill run down her spine. "You've been watching me?" "Yes," he confirmed without a hint of apology. "We saw you give your own lunch to a homeless man outside the restaurant on a day you were working a double shift. We saw you chase a customer for 2 blocks to return the wallet he had dropped. We learned about your mother's illness and your relentless efforts to provide for her. We saw strength and dignity in the face of overwhelming hardship." He gestured toward the city below. "This world, Miss Vance, is full of people who are competent. It is full of people who are ambitious, but it is starving for people who are genuinely good, especially when they have every reason to be bitter and angry. The final test was designed to see how you would react to a moment of profound personal injustice. I needed to see what you would do when pushed to your breaking point." "The dinner." Elara breathed, the pieces starting to click into place. "Yes, I created a scenario of maximum expectation and maximum disappointment. The expensive meal, the large bill, all to set the stage. I watched you serve me, knowing your circumstances. I wanted to see if you would falter, if you would become resentful, if your mask of professionalism would crack. It never did. And then the tip. The $1 insult. I wanted to see what you would do with it. What did you expect me to do? She asked, her voice filled with a tremor of indignation. I expected you to do what 99 out of 100 people would have done, to crumple it in anger, to throw it away in disgust, to curse my name. That would have been a human reaction, an understandable one, but it would have been a reaction born of ego and resentment. He leaned in closer, his grey eyes locking onto hers. But you did something extraordinary. Our surveillance of the staff area showed us everything. You were humiliated. Your colleague mocked you. You went into the alley and you cried. And then you smoothed out the dollar bill and put it in your pocket with the rest of your earnings. You accepted the injustice with a quiet, heartbreaking grace. You refused to let my cruelty define your actions. You treated that dollar not as an insult, but as what it was money to be used for your mother. In that moment, you proved you were the one we had been searching for. Ilara's mind was spinning. The past few days, the humiliation, the despair, it had all been a fabrication, a test. The one. For what? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. What have you been searching for? Alistair Blackwood's expression softened the weariness in his eyes, deepening into a profound sadness. I'm looking for someone to help me give away my fortune. The statement hung in the air between them, so immense and unbelievable that Ilara could do nothing but stare. Alistair Blackwood, one of the wealthiest men in the world, wanted her a waitress to help him give his money away. Seeing the utter disbelief on her face, Blackwood stood and walked over to his desk. He picked up a framed photograph and brought it back, holding it out for her to see. It was a picture of a woman with kind eyes and a warm, radiant smile. She was beautiful. This was my wife, Eleanor. He said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. She was the best person I have ever known. She was the heart of my life, the moral compass that guided everything I did. 10 years ago, she was diagnosed with a rare form of amyloidosis. Much like your mother's condition, it was aggressive, and the treatments were new and astronomically expensive. He looked out the window, his gaze distant. I had all the money in the world. I hired the best doctors, flew them in from every corner of the globe. We chased every experimental treatment, every clinical trial. But what I discovered, Miss Vance, is that wealth can buy access, but it cannot buy time, and it cannot by itself navigate a broken and cruelly indifferent medical system. We were buried in paperwork, in bureaucratic red tape, in insurance denials, in the cold clinical language of non-standard protocols. He turned back to Ilara, his eyes glistening. Eleanor died 2 years later, and in my grief I realized a terrible truth. If I, with my limitless resources, had this much trouble navigating the system, what chance did a normal person have? What chance did someone like you working 3 jobs just to keep your head above water actually have against such a monolithic beast? He placed the photograph carefully back on his desk. So I made a promise to her. I would use my fortune not just to fund research, but to fight for the patients themselves. To create an organization that would act as a sword and a shield for families crushed by catastrophic illness. He took a deep breath. That organization is the Eleanor Blackwood Foundation. For the past 8 years, we have operated with a board of directors and a team of financial managers. We have endowed hospital wings and funded research grants. We have done good, but we have been doing it from a distance. We've been writing checks. Eleanor would have held their hands. She would have made the phone calls. She would have fought in the trenches with them. The foundation is missing its heart. It is missing its purpose. This, at last, was the heart of the matter. The reason for the elaborate test for the surveillance for the $1 bill. The foundation is creating a new division, he explained. The Patient Advocacy Division. This will be our front line, a team dedicated to working directly with families. They will handle insurance appeals, find specialists, arrange travel and accommodation, negotiate with pharmaceutical companies, and provide direct financial grants to cover what insurance will not. They will be the champions these families so desperately need. He looked directly at Elara, his gaze intense. But the person who leads this division cannot be a corporate suit. They cannot be a lawyer who only sees loopholes, or a doctor who only sees a diagnosis. They have to be someone who understands the fear, someone who knows what it feels like to count every single dollar while the person you love is slipping away. Someone with the empathy to listen and the steel in their spine to fight. Someone who, when faced with injustice, doesn't lash out but holds their ground with quiet dignity. They need to be you, Elara. The air left Elara's lungs. It was as if he had reached into her soul and pulled out her deepest, most desperate prayers and fears and offered them back to her, transformed into a job description. "Me," she whispered. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm a waitress. I have no experience. I don't have a college degree. I wouldn't know the first thing about running a division of a major foundation." "You have a degree in humanity, Miss Vance," he countered firmly. "You have a PhD in resilience. You know more about what these families are going through than anyone with an MBA from Harvard ever could. We can teach you the administrative side. We have lawyers and accountants for that. What we cannot teach is character. We cannot teach the heart, and that you have in abundance." He walked to his desk and picked up a file. "I want to offer you the position of Director of Patient Advocacy for the Eleanor Blackwood Foundation. It comes with a salary of $250,000 a year, full benefits, and the resources of my entire organization at your disposal." Elara's head swam. The number was so large it was meaningless. It was a lottery win. It was a fantasy. "And," he continued, his voice softening, "as your first official act, should you accept, I want you to consider the case of Sarah Vance." He opened the file. Inside were medical charts, doctor's notes, and financial statements. It was her mother's entire life on paper. "I took the liberty of having my medical team review your mother's case. The diagnosis is correct. The recommended treatment, Soliris, is also correct. While you've been working at Aurelia, my people have been on the phone." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk to her. It was a letter. "We have arranged for your mother to be transferred by private medical transport this afternoon to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. She has an appointment on Monday with Dr. Aris Thorne, the world's leading expert on AAUS. The Eleanor Blackwood Foundation has already deposited $1 million into an account with the clinic to cover the full uninhibited cost of her treatment for the next 2 years. All of it is taken care of." Elara looked down at the letter, her vision blurring with tears. The name Dr. Aris Thorne was one she had typed into Google late at night, a name that represented an impossible dream. The words, treatment, covered, taken care of, were a balm to a wound she had carried for so long. The tears she had held back in the alley behind the restaurant finally came, not tears of despair, but of a relief so profound it felt like her bones were dissolving. She put her head in her hands and sobbed all the fear, the exhaustion, and the hopelessness pouring out of her in one cathartic flood. Alistair Blackwood didn't speak. He simply pushed a box of tissues across the desk and waited patiently for the storm to pass. When Ilara's sobs finally subsided, she looked up, her face streaked with tears, a raw mixture of gratitude and apprehension in her eyes. "Why?" she asked again, but this time the question had a different meaning. It wasn't why me, but why this much? Because Ilara, Alistair said gently, "I am not offering you charity. I am offering you a job. And this is your first case. The Foundation's resources are now your resources. Your mother's fight is now our fight. This is how it will be for every family you choose to help. We don't offer half measures. We offer a total war against the disease and the bureaucracy that surrounds it. You are the general, and I am merely the man who supplies the army." The proposition was staggering. Her immediate crisis, the one that had been the singular focus of her existence, was solved. The crushing weight on her chest had been lifted. But in its place was a new pressure, the weight of an immense responsibility. Self-doubt crept in a cold and familiar whisper. "A general, I'm just a waitress. I serve food, I clean up messes. What do I know about leading a war?" She thought of the corporate vultures, the insurance agents with their dead eyes and pre-written scripts of denial, the hospital administrators with their ledgers and bottom lines. How could she possibly fight them? I don't know if I can do this," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I'm not smart enough. I'm not powerful enough." Alistair leaned back in his chair, a faint, sad smile on his lips. Eleanor used to say that power isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about knowing you're on the side of right and refusing to sit down until everyone else knows it too. You've been fighting this battle alone with no weapons and no allies for months. All I am doing is giving you an arsenal and an army. The courage to fight. That's something you've had all along." He let the silence stretch, allowing her to process the enormity of it all. He wasn't pressuring her. He was giving her a genuine choice. She could take the money he'd already given her, ensure her mother's care, and walk away. She could go back to her life free from the immediate financial terror. Or she could step through this door he was holding open and become someone new. She thought about the families she'd seen in the waiting rooms at County General, their faces etched with the same fear and exhaustion she saw in her own mirror every morning. She thought about the hushed, desperate phone calls she'd overheard people pleading with insurance companies. She thought of the quiet dignity of her own mother, who never complained, who only ever worried about the burden she was placing on her daughter. This job wasn't about a salary or a fancy title. It was a chance to turn her own pain into a purpose. It was a chance to ensure that no one else felt as helpless and alone as she had. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it was overshadowed by something else, a fierce, rising sense of resolve. The waitress who was afraid of debt collectors was gone. In her place was a woman who had just been handed a sword. She looked up and met Alistair Blackwood's gaze, her own eyes clear and steady. "When do I start?" A genuine, brilliant smile transformed Alistair's face, erasing the years of weariness. "You already have. Your first task is to go to the hospital. Be with your mother when the transport team arrives. Your place is with her. Arthur Harrison will handle all the logistics. He'll also provide you with a temporary corporate apartment near the clinic in Rochester, so you can be with her during the initial phase of her treatment." He stood and extended his hand. Ilara stood and took it. His grip was firm, a silent confirmation of their new partnership. Your second task, he continued, begins next week. Arthur will set you up in a temporary office here. You'll have a team of legal and medical experts to brief you. Your first assignment will be to build your patient advocacy division from the ground up. You decide who to hire, you set the criteria for the cases we take, you write the playbook. This is your division, Ilara. Lead it. Leaving Blackwood Tower was the mirror image of arriving. The descent in the elevator felt not like a return to her old life, but a journey toward a new one. The city spread out below was no longer an intimidating landscape of indifference. It was a territory, a place filled with people she could now help. The first call she made was to Aurelia. She told Marcus she was quitting Effective immediately. There was a satisfying beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. She could almost hear Chloe's jaw hitting the floor in the background. Her second call was to her mother's nurse, her voice clear and confident as she explained the unbelievable news. When she arrived at the apartment, the medical transport team was already there. She walked into the living room and saw her mother's face, pale and weak, but her eyes were filled with a light of hope Ilara hadn't seen in months. "Is it true, honey?" Sarah whispered. Ilara knelt by the bed and took her mother's frail hand. "It's true, Mom," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Everything's going to be okay now. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." In that moment, holding her mother's hand, Ilara Vance knew she had made the right choice. Her first battle was personal, but it was only the beginning. 6 months later, the view from Ilara Vance's office was almost identical to the one from Alistair Blackwood's. She was 2 floors down in a space that was modern and efficient rather than opulent. The panoramic window looked out over the same city, but Ilara saw it with entirely different eyes. Her transformation had been swift and total. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of learning. She devoured books on medical law, insurance policies, and patient rights. She sat in on meetings with Alistair's top lawyers and financial advisors, absorbing information like a sponge. They were impressed by her sharp, practical intelligence and her unwillingness to be intimidated by jargon. She cut through the complexities with a simple question: how does this help the family? She hired her team with the same incisive focus. She didn't look for Ivy League degrees. She looked for retired nurses who knew the hospital system inside and out, social workers with a history of fierce advocacy, and even a former insurance adjuster who knew all the tricks of the trade and wanted to use his knowledge for good. She built a team of fighters, people who, like her, were driven by empathy. Her mother's treatment at the Mayo Clinic had been a miraculous success. Dr. Thorne had stabilized her condition, and Solaris was working. Sarah Vance was now living in a comfortable apartment near the clinic, regaining her strength, her medical care managed by the best team in the world. For the first time in years, Ilara could speak to her mother and not have the conversation revolve around fear and money. The patient advocacy division under Ilara's leadership became the soul of the Eleanor Blackwood Foundation. Their first official case was a 7-year-old boy from Ohio with a rare form of muscular dystrophy whose family was on the verge of bankruptcy. Ilara herself flew to meet them. She sat in their cluttered living room, listened to their story, and saw the same exhaustion in their eyes that she remembered on her own. 2 days later, the foundation had secured the boy a spot in a clinical trial in Boston, covered the family's mortgage for a year, and arranged for a wheelchair-accessible van to be delivered to their house. Ilara wasn't just writing checks. She was dismantling the obstacles that stood between a family and their hope. Alistair Blackwood became her mentor, and in time, a father figure. He marveled at what she had built. She had taken his grief-fueled vision and given it a powerful human heartbeat. The foundation was no longer a remote financial entity. It was a force of nature. One afternoon, Alistair walked into her office. "I was just reviewing the quarterly reports," he said, a note of awe in his voice. "In 3 months, your division has directly assisted 47 families. You've overturned 22 insurance denials and secured over $9 million in medical services and direct aid. You're a natural, Ilara." Ilara smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile that reached her eyes. "It's easy when you know what's at stake." She glanced at her desk. Sitting in a small, elegant silver frame was a single, crisp $1 bill. She had retrieved it from her old apartment, a relic from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Some of her new colleagues had asked about it, assuming it was her first dollar earned, or some kind of good luck charm. "It's a reminder," she would tell them. "It reminds me of the true value of things." The dollar wasn't a reminder of the humiliation. It was a reminder that character is the one currency that cannot be devalued. It was a symbol of the fact that true wealth isn't about how much you have, but about what you do with it. Alistair Blackwood had tested her with a single dollar, but in doing so, he had given her the power to change thousands of lives, starting with her own. Her past as a waitress wasn't a weakness to be overcome. It was the source of her greatest strength. She knew how it felt to be invisible, and she had dedicated her life to making sure no one fighting for their life ever felt that way again. The first year of Ilara's new life was a testament to her purpose. She moved with a confidence that felt both innate and hard-won. The patient advocacy division became a legend in the closed circles of rare disease specialists and desperate families. Ilara was no longer just a director. She was a beacon. She had proven Alistair Blackwood right 100 times over. But a promise she was about to learn is not a single event, but a daily relentless defense of its meaning. The challenge arrived in a file so thin it was almost weightless, a stark contrast to the gravity of its contents. The patient was a 6-year-old boy named Leo Petrov. He had fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva FOP, a devastatingly rare genetic condition that was slowly turning his muscle and connective tissue into bone. He was in essence becoming a living statue. His parents, Ukrainian immigrants who ran a small bakery, had exhausted every option in the American medical system. There was, however, a sliver of hope. A private research institute in Zurich, Switzerland, was pioneering an experimental gene editing therapy. It was unproven, the risks were enormous, and the probability of success was, as the doctors put it, statistically uncertain. The cost for the treatment protocol was a staggering $4 million. For Ilara, the decision was instantaneous. This was the exact reason the foundation existed. It was for the Leo Petrovs of the world, for the statistically uncertain cases that everyone else had written off. She authorized the full funding, setting the complex logistics in motion. What she hadn't anticipated was the backlash. It came not from the outside, but from within the foundation itself. Leland Croft was a board member from the old guard. A man of cold numbers and generational wealth, he had been on the board long before Ilara's arrival. He viewed the foundation as a legacy-building machine, a way to put the Blackwood name on hospital wings, and research grants, tangible, permanent, and excellent, for public relations. He saw Ilara's division as a sentimental, fiscally reckless charity boutique. When he saw the $4 million expenditure for a single high-risk case, he acted. He called for an emergency meeting of the Foundation's Finance Committee, which he chaired. Alistair, as the founder, would be present, but Croft was intent on making this a referendum on Ilara's leadership. The boardroom was an intimidating space of polished dark wood and black leather. Leland Croft sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 other board members who shared his pragmatic numbers. First philosophy. Ilara sat opposite them with Alistair at the far end, observing silently. $4 million, Miss Vance. Croft began his voice, smooth and sharp as broken glass. $4 million for a single patient with what your own attached report calls a low probability of a successful outcome. Could you please enlighten the committee as to how this represents a responsible use of the Foundation's capital? The Foundation's purpose, Mr. Croft, isn't to generate capital, but to spend it saving lives. Ilara countered her voice, steady despite the hammering in her chest. Leo Petrov has no other options. This is his only chance. A chance, Croft scoffed, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the file. For $4 million, we could fund the entire annual budget of a free clinic in the inner city. We could purchase new MRI machines for 3 different rural hospitals. We could provide proven conventional treatments for at least a dozen other families whose chances are significantly higher. What you are proposing is not stewardship. It is gambling. You are betting the cost of a small hospital wing on a single roll of the dice. Another board member chimed in. The optics are also a concern. How do we justify this expenditure to our other partners? It seems extravagant. The unspoken words hung in the air. It seems like a decision made by an emotional, unqualified woman. Croft leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. With all due respect, Miss Vance, your background is in hospitality, not risk management or clinical science. Perhaps your personal empathy is clouding your professional judgment. The jab was meant to sting, to remind her of her origins, to put her back in the place he felt she belonged. A year ago, it would have shattered her. But now Ilara saw it for what it was, a weapon used by a man who had no other. She took a slow, deliberate breath and met his gaze. You are absolutely right, Mr. Croft. My background is not in risk management. It's in watching a clock knowing that every tick is 1 second closer to an eviction notice. It's in calculating whether I can afford my mother's medicine or the electric bill, but not both. It's in serving men like you a $700 dinner and being handed a single dollar, being told that my time, my effort, my humanity is worth practically nothing. The room went silent. My judgment isn't clouded by empathy, she continued, her voice gaining strength, resonating with an authority that came from lived experience, not a textbook. It is forged by it. You see a balance sheet, a low probability. I see a 6-year-old boy who can no longer raise his arms to hug his mother. You talk about the cost of a hospital wing. His parents talk about the sound he makes at night when his joints begin to lock. The purpose of the Eleanor Blackwood Foundation, the promise Alistair made, wasn't to play the odds. It was to step in when the odds were impossible. It was to be the last best hope. She looked from face to face. If we start making decisions based on optics and responsible investment, then we are no better than the insurance companies we fight every single day. We become the very thing we were created to destroy. So yes, I am gambling. I am gambling $4 million that this little boy's life is worth the risk. It is the best and most important investment this foundation will ever make. She finished, her heart pounding. She had laid her entire philosophy, her very reason for being in that chair on the table. Leland Croft was momentarily speechless, his attack having been turned back on him with stunning force. He looked to Alistair for support, an appeal to the billionaire who surely understood the language of money. Alistair Blackwood had been silent the entire time, watching Ilara. He finally spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of ultimate authority. Leland, he said, for 8 years this foundation put our name on buildings, and I felt nothing. In the last year, Ilara has put our purpose into people's lives. Eleanor did not die so I could get a tax write-off for a new oncology ward. She died because the system is designed to give up on the hard cases." He stood up, his gaze sweeping over the committee. "The Patient Advocacy Division is not a line item in our budget. It is the budget. It is the beginning and the end of our mission. Ilara's decision stands. Fund the treatment." The finality in his tone was absolute. The meeting was over. Leland Croft sat back, his face a mask of barely concealed fury. He had not only lost the argument, he had been reminded, in no uncertain terms, who held the power. Ilara walked out of the boardroom, feeling not triumphant, but reaffirmed. She had faced down the part of the world that saw people as numbers on a page, and she had won. Her power didn't come from Alistair's backing or the title on her door. It came from the unshakable conviction, born in a rundown apartment and forged in the fire of a billionaire's test. She went back to her office, picked up the phone, and made the call to Leo Petrov's parents, her voice clear and strong as she prepared to give them the one thing money was never supposed to be able to buy: a miracle. Ilara's journey teaches us that our true character is revealed not when things are easy, but in moments of profound disappointment and injustice. That $1 bill wasn't an insult. It was a doorway. It proves that kindness, integrity, and grace under pressure are currencies more valuable than any bank account. Her life was changed forever, not by the money she was given, but by the purpose she earned and the hope she chose to create for others. She reminds us that sometimes the greatest strength can be found in the quietest, most dignified response to the world's cruelty. If this story inspired you or made you think, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear a message of hope, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible life-changing stories. What did you think of Ilara's reaction to the tip? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.